Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're here. Nathan is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Rich Scheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, good morning, Vincent Finelli. How are you today?
Hey, Rich, I'll tell you, I've been thinking. We've had 5 inches of rain in the last 7 days, and very unusual. In Virginia, we had 7 days of nonstop rain, drizzle, and trees started falling over. The root balls just couldn't support the height of the trees because the soil was so soggy. And this is a preparedness item that I'd like to share with our class. We've talked about it many times, so I'm just going to give you the latest information. So yesterday I was traveling to buy some supplies for the farm. And as I was traveling through the byways of Missouri, I noticed lagoons. Now, a lagoon is an open pit, or it's an open pond that... instead of having a septic system at a farmhouse, the state of Missouri encourages the use of lagoons. So what it is it's a pond, and the toilet flushes directly into it. The sink runs directly into it, and it's encouraged that you have a fence around it so no one goes swimming in it. And what happens is the sun disinfects it. Well, in some of these lagoons that we saw, they were overflowing. So what we're saying is raw sewage is cross-connecting with surface water, which is running downhill into the streams. Now, somewhere downstream, some people are drinking that water. Just wanted to share with you that that's what happens in these non-stop rainstorms or these massive flooding situations. Now, it's not just Missouri. It's not just our neck of the woods. It's everywhere. Wherever there's flooding, there's the potential for a cross-connect between sewage and the drinking water supply. So I just wanted to mention that. So if you live in the city and your water supply is cross-connected with sewage or flooding chemicals from garages, people's garages where they've got Roundup and Sevin and other insecticides and herbicides, and those containers break open and they mix with the water, they cross-connect with the potable water supply, you get to drink it. So that's just one more reason why you should consider getting out of the city. Because if you have your own well, you can still have that cross-connect. However, if you have your own well, you can treat your water in your well with chlorine. And we've talked about that, and you can look up how to do that. But the main point is if you are at the mercy of the system, and the only extra water you have is what you bought in bottles, that may not be enough. So store some more water if you're not going to get out of the city. If you are going to get out of the city, make sure you buy a place where you have your own water well, and make sure it's a place that's more uphill than downhill, because water runs downhill, and you get whatever runs downhill. Rich, your thoughts?
Well, it sounds to me, Vince, like our corrupt economic system, where crap flows downhill, and the aristocracy versus the serfs. And pardon the pun, but that's pretty much the way things work in a situation or a system where corruption and manipulation, deception, basically rules the roost in America. And the little people, as you know, listeners, the little people is the bottom 93% of income earners, because the middle class and poor has melded together. And that's why we at USA Prepares tries to stick up for the little guy. We're not trying to represent any particular group. We're just trying to stick up for the little guy who believes that hard work, effort, proven results, and qualifications and protection under the law should matter. But in America, with the corruption that we have, it is no longer the case. So that being said, Vince, I think when you talk about moving out to the country, I think we should talk briefly about what we need to prepare for as the little people in America, and how can we control our own destiny a little better, because freedom and liberty and time and health and ability to control our own destiny is getting washed downstream with the you-know-what. So that being said, the old school was college and doing a certain tradition, and where I definitely feel that college degrees, 90% of them are worthless, because there's so much corruption in the market, especially with our present demographic situation, the corrupt monetary policies from the central banks, Keynesian economics, and group identity politics, a.k.a. victim group status, a.k.a. protectionist group status. Basically, the powers that be want to eliminate the word group and anything associated to that metaphor, because they want to make sure we have race wars. The powers that be want to make sure that we have violence on the street. They want to foment hate. It's kind of like, I read an article just this morning about Judge Sotomayor, says that regarding the cops, we should shoot first and then think later in response to police shootings. Now, all cops perfect? No. Is all people perfect? No. That's what makes us human. We're all imperfect sinners. We can do a lot of things, and we've suggested on this show, we can, for example, invoke the 10th Amendment that don't allow Fed training and Fed weaponry to state police. We can establish citizen review boards, which will have the authority over police brutality. We can have police wear more cameras in 100% of the precincts in America. See, the powers that be, they want to preserve the system, the status quo. In other words, they'll say, let's shoot the cops. But are they ever going to announce, do we need to shoot our lawyers, judges, bankers, and politicians, who are the true goons bought and paid for by the elite? See, folks, it's not a left-right paradigm. That's a very small portion of it. The whole thing is about the aristocracy controlling the serfs. And talking about economy, Trump, and you've heard me say this many times, basically inherited sabotage and demolition, whether you like him or hate him. The status quo is basically creating what I call an incognito caste system, where 69% of Americans don't even have $1,000 in savings, 78% live paycheck to paycheck. Now, when you incorporate the overall headwinds of future growth, like corporate debt, global debt, household debt, government promises, we need to prepare. And like Vince said a few moments ago, we all need to start thinking about moving rural and thinking outside the box. We need to think for ourselves. We need to hone our own skill sets. Now, I'm not saying college it should be 100% avoided, but first of all, it's not for everybody. But when you go to college and you come out in so much debt that you have to rent, and you lose out on time leverage on establishing equity and putting money into principal, your time leverage is greatly compromised, because when you get to a certain age and you're not out of debt, you cannot retire. And see, this is what the aristocracy wants. They want you to be debt slaves. And that's what we're trying to do, is give you options to become debt-free. Now, I'm certainly a proponent of maybe a little silver and gold, maybe a little cash, maybe a little U.S. treasuries, maybe a little cryptocurrencies, maybe being around like-minded people who say, well, we're not going to do it alone. We have people who know how to grow food. We have people who know how to build. We know how people who how to do this. But we're teaching our youth, the last couple of generations, how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. We're not teaching them skill sets on how to survive, especially with the average person in urban, suburban America has 9 days of food. 9 meals of food. So that's basically 3 days. So let's say we started talking about teaching people how to preserve food, how to garden, how to raise animals, maybe hunting and fishing, maybe creating your own solar arrays or alternative energy. How about classes on edible and medicinal plants? How about what type of land or acreage to buy and what to look for regarding rural property? I think the number one most important thing is teaching and helping others and creating a balance in life. You know, Vince, we were talking about this privately, me and Vince, yesterday. He called me and, I cracked a couple of jokes, and I said, Vince, you always, 95% of the time, you talk to me on air, even though I've been to your ranch and we do talk privately. But, I do crack jokes a lot. And we've gotten to the point in America where political correctness has made humor and satire almost extinct, because the powers that be say, you can't say these things because you're going to offend somebody. Basically, this is an indirect assault on free speech. So they're telling you that this is the way it's going to be. The aristocracy, we're going to be able to fly everywhere in the world and tell you about your bad carbon footprint, while their carbon footprint is 1,000,000 times the average person. They're going to tell you that you can't have guns, you can't protect yourself, when they have the audacity to hire private security, and when in public office, have the triple audacity to hire private security with your taxpayer dollars to protect them. So we need to learn about a balance in life. We need to call out hypocrisies and double standards, and this is why I've always mentioned about practice what you preach laws and how important they are in America. The number one imbalance that I see, especially with today's younger generations, is the imbalance between technology and nature. And I think people are waking up to the fact that the Facebooks and the Googles and all these AI companies are taking advantage of the people. And we'll talk more about that on the other side, Vince.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Rich Sheben's with us, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. So, Rich, you're talking about teaching and helping people. Please continue.
Thank you, Vince. Basically what we were talking about was one of these days creating something regarding to my Chapter 15 in the book regarding self-sufficiency preparedness schools. And we were thinking about doing this, and we're thinking about creating a liaison, somebody who would accept phone calls. And what we're thinking about doing, folks, is starting it out over like a GoToMeeting.com or a Skype or some type of speakerphone scenario where people don't have to leave their homes. And this way, because every state has rural areas. Every state. I even made a joke in the book mentioning that New Jersey has rural areas. And as if you've been to the Garden State, you might find that hard to believe, but they do. And what's happening is, and it's being very prevalent in Montana, in Wyoming, in Idaho. Idaho is actually the number one growth state in the union right now. Utah, a lot of the western states, the super wealthy are buying up land by the hundreds of thousands of acres, and pretty soon there's not going to be much left for the people. And I even read an occasional article where the powers that be are trying to lobby to buy government land, in other words, state and federal land, where the poor people, the bottom 93%, want to recreate on, and pretty soon they're going to be pushed out and pushed into urban, suburban America by design in order to control the masses. So what we're talking about is getting people on the computer, on the phone, and talking about off-grid living, talking about alternative energy, buying land, raising animals, hunting and fishing, canning and preserving your food, maybe handgun defense in our Constitution, a lot of financial counseling and economy. A lot of people just don't have the time to learn these things. And if I have time today, I want to talk about some of the arguments I read on a daily basis. Some people say, no, it's deflation. No, it's inflation. No, it's deflation. No. I want to put an exclamation point on that today if we have time. Wild, edible, and medicinal plants. Basically, botany in general. It could be berry picking, could be mushrooming, all the things that we talk about. Nutrition. It's amazing how many people have lost the ability to know about nutrition. And that's why cancer rates and heart attacks and everything, longevity is going in the wrong direction. Homeschooling ideas, gardening and farming. I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about because 90% of people live in urban, suburban America. 0.1% of people live off-grid. Now, I'm not saying everybody has to live off-grid. I'm not saying everybody has to live rural. But what if we were to create a database, America, and get people thinking outside the box where we could get people on the phone, and then Tom, Dick, and Harry, and then Sue and Jane and Phyllis say, hey, this is a good idea. I want to do this lifestyle. I realize that 90% of the college degrees are worthless. I realize that I can't control my own destiny because the aristocracy has made it almost impossible to do so. And basically, the powers that be have made it to where everything is bought and paid for with the big corporations and the fascist system with the alliance of big government. So when you look at the subsidies, the money printing, the special interests, the lobbying, the PACs, it's pretty obvious that the only words that what was left of the rigged game for the middle class is like solvency and liquidity, because that's the only thing that's important, because everybody is treading water right now. And with the advent of robotics, automation, artificial intelligence, and the technocracy that's taking over our lives in every aspect is making it more and more difficult to think outside the box. So if we were to create consultation over the internet or phone, and we would love your feedback on this. And we're going to talk about this in another show, maybe a month or so down the road, where we might have a liaison, we might have a venue, we might have a phone number to call, and people can sign up from all over the country, and we can give talks to large groups of people. Then the databases will get smaller into subsets, and we'll talk to different people about getting different people together based on their capital resources, their skill sets, their desires, their dreams, etc. And I hear the music, Vince, so we'll finish that on the other side.
Yeah. Rich Eben's with us, and we're talking about teaching. I think we're talking about teaching the things that we know how to do. Rich Eben's with us. And Rich, you mentioned the word database. I believe what you're referring to is a group of people, like-minded individuals who have not yet fulfilled their dreams and quests. Is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And,
okay.
When you hear a lot of these words, folks, like populism, the elite don't like populism because they can't control the narrative and all this stuff. Basically, the elite should be running a little scared right now because the people are waking up to the fact that the elite have used us to poison us against ourselves. I want you to think about that. So populism is basically turning into, because it's obvious that there's no signs of prosperity for the bottom 93%. There might be an exception to the rule if somebody's willing to become an actor or a singer or some type of Hollywood celebrity, and they're willing to sell out. In other words, carry the narrative for the elite. So that being said, I think populism should be the term necessary survivalism, because that's what's happening. You look at the bottom 93% of Americans, we've been in a recession or a hybrid stagflation for quite some time. Rising levels of debt are required to sustain even retail sales, never mind most people's way of life. So we need all this talk about GDP and all these measurements of growth for the bottom 93%. You need to ignore them. It's all BS. What we need to concentrate on is being out of debt and having a healthy savings and adopting certain lifestyles and skill sets that's going to make us survive. The average work week in America is like 33 hours. So, unless you're a government worker. And how many people get not everybody is a government worker, and it's pretty obvious that our debt and our deficit, both trade and budget, is totally out of control. So I can't see government workers getting that pension because all the pensions are in the red. So there's no benefits for part-time workers. So we need to start thinking outside the box, and this is why this idea is so important. I get lots of calls. People email me. I don't even know how people get my number because, believe it or not, I'm not listed. And I spend a lot of time talking to people, whether it be over a speakerphone or the venues that I mentioned to you earlier. That's one of the reasons I came out with a DVD video to give the tour of my land, my garden, the inside of my cabin, because I was getting overwhelmed with people from around the world contacting me and saying they want to see how I live off-grid and self-sufficiency. And I've had some pretty big names be here. I'm not going to name drop because it doesn't do anybody any good. What my purpose in life right now is to help as many people as I can, and that's the way it should be. So if we could create some type of situation and a venue where we can give regular talks, me and Vincent, talking about off-grid living and self-sufficiency. And I'll tell you something, people, I don't get anything by being on this show. And Vince doesn't make a profit either. We do this all for the people. And I'm not saying this because I don't need to blow smoke up Vince's ass. I don't need to get a pat on the back by Vince because I'm doing this on a voluntary basis. We're good friends. We trust each other. But for what I'm about to say, I'm not receiving any benefit because what most people do in a working environment is suck up to people and try to put them on a pedestal so they're going to get certain benefits. Well, that's not the case with my relationship with Vince. But I'm going to say I've never met anybody who knows so much about so much, from building to drywall to electricity to plumbing to off-grid living to automobiles to it's unbelievable what this man knows. It's almost I can't even put it in words. I mean, he knows so much about so much, and it's because he does it and he reads it. And I can't think of a better person to do this with than Vincent Finelli, because when people go to school from kindergarten to the highest level in college, have you noticed most teachers, and I say most, I'm like 95%, they teach theory and not practical experience because they haven't done it. They come fresh out of school, off their degrees, when the average teacher should be required to have a minimum of 15 years of successful private sector experience. But that's not the case, because the teachers have been groomed and cultivated to pass on the narrative to the people, to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people. Teachers are, for the most part, a political tool. Now, there's some teachers and professors who don't believe that, and I'll just give one example. The teacher at the University of Michigan, I believe, the professor, along with Catherine Austin Fitz, who verified the fact that the powers that be are most likely buying stocks and bonds, which could create a hyperinflation to destroy the bottom 93% of America, because $21 trillion was missing from the federal government books. Now, that's a great example of patriotism at the teaching level, but that's the exception and not the rule. So I think, Vince, if you look at the average person in America that spends 7 to 8 hours on their TV and smartphone, that's a national statistic, who have 9 meals of food, who live in urban, suburban America with very few skill sets, and who feel like a hamster running on a treadmill running to nowhere. What if we were to talk to America at a different level, and different subsets of those people at different levels, and maybe even specifically in person, maybe even on the ground, maybe even showing them what type of real estate to buy, where to put their cabin, their garden, their solar, and really teach people the pioneering homesteading ways that are lost, but dovetail those 19th century skills with 21st century technology. What do you think about that idea, Vince?
Well, I really like the idea. Let me give out a phone number. If you'd like to call us and discuss this with us, 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. I'd love to hear what your comments are about this topic. And let me just respond to a few of the things that you said with this one thought. So how many people would love to do what Rich Scheben does? Would love to do what the Finellis do? They bought a farm, bought a ranch, live off-grid. But here's a question. How do you buy a farm? How do you do that? Now, when we bought our first farm, it was our first farm. We'd never done that before. There are a million questions. And we didn't know all the avenues to pursue to find the answers to these questions. So let me just throw out a few questions. So when you buy a farm, you need to look at a lot of things, like taxes. What are the taxes in the area? How are they different from the surrounding area? What about water? Where does it come from? Where does it go? If there's a flood, will the farm be flooded? What about antennas? How many antennas are there in that area that are within a few miles of that farm? Are there 2? Are there 300? And what kind of antennas are they? Are they television antennas that produce a lot of electromagnetic radiation? Are they microwaves, which are even more dangerous? What about the topography? What about air pollution in that particular area? What's upwind? Are there factories? Are there nuclear reactors? How about the nearby cities? How close are they? And how do you get to the city from the farm? How do the city dwellers get to the farm? How close are you to a interstate? Railroad tracks? What is the quality of the land for growing? How much government supervision do you get in that particular location? Are there any barriers to entry that keep the undesirables out? How about military bases? How close are they? Are they targets? Is the farm uphill? Is it downhill? How about streams, ponds, creeks? What was the land used for before you'd move in? Was it polluted? Was it stripped of its nutrients? Was it farmed into a position where you won't be able to grow anything? Did they grow tobacco on it? If they grew tobacco on it, you'd have tobacco insecticide residue. Do you want that in your vegetables, your produce? Tobacco leaches the nutrients, the fertility out of the soil. It can make it almost worthless. So there are a lot of things to think about. And what kind of animals can you grow? And what about fencing? Just a million questions. And I think, Rich, what you're saying is that you and I have figured out a lot of the things that you need to think about that many people wouldn't even know where to start. Not just talking about buying a farm. We haven't talked about solar power. We haven't talked about equipment. We haven't talked about the neighborhood. There's so many things that go into the equation about how to select that right property, of which there's only one. The one next to it's not the same as that one. They're all different. How do you protect yourself? How do you avoid making mistakes? Is that, Rich Scheben, I'm just going through this thought process with you. Is this what you're thinking about that we would cover if we had a seminar, a hands-on, a video, a teleconference, an expo, something like that? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that and much more. And obviously we're heading into a break. On the other side, I will give some specific examples regarding some financial and economic reasoning for doing this.
All right. Hold that thought. We'll be right back. So it looks like Rich Scheben is talking about education and how we can help teach the kind of things that we've done. And, you know, often the background, you can't hear it probably through this microphone, but there's a chainsaw running, and it's cutting firewood. And just the topic of, if we were going to talk about how to buy a chainsaw, it would take at least a half an hour to go through a lot of the choices and selection criteria to buy a chainsaw. Half hour. We could talk about, for several broadcasts, how to buy a generator, the size. Should it be natural gas, propane, gasoline, diesel? What are the pros and cons of each? The kind of decisions that we make and what goes into those decisions, I think Rich Sheben's talking about. Let me give you an example, class. So, this off-grid lifestyle, this farming lifestyle, this ranch lifestyle causes us to make a lot of, it causes us to have to invent things. Let me give you one simple example. So, we have grass, we grow grass, and the cows eat the grass. But the soil needs to be limed, every 5 years or so. Well, nobody in this area is willing to spread the lime. There are several quarries within 50 miles, so I can buy the lime, and it's inexpensive. It's about $7 a ton. What can you buy a ton of for $7, right? And I can have it hauled for about $7 a ton to our farm. And then it's going to sit in a pile. But how do we spread 40,000 pounds of lime? No one wants to spread it. I can get it. I can have it hauled here on a tractor trailer, but I can't get it spread. So what do? Well, you don't give up. What we did was we bought an old salt truck, the kind of truck that goes on the road, that spreads salt. We're going to convert that to spreading lime. This is a big diesel-engined truck. It's huge. It can carry a total load of 26,000 pounds. It's a big truck. For the average guy, it's kind of huge. That's the kind of decisions that we ultimately make with information to avoid making mistakes. You make too many mistakes, you're out of business. So I think Rich Scheben is talking about helping those of you who are interested in pursuing what we do, what Rich Scheben does in Montana, what the Finelli family does here in Missouri, how to do it, how to think about it, how to make those decisions. How much does it cost? How long does it take? How hard is it? Is it possible? Because if you think about it, it's quite a daunting task for someone who's just going to do it for the first time. It really is daunting. And what you're looking at, I guess, Rich, is your experience of 20-plus years, our experience of 20-plus years. Actually, it's probably combined. We have maybe 60 years of experience doing this, the farming, ranching adventure. And I think what you're saying is there a way that we can share it? Is there a way that we can help people? Is there a way that we can answer a lot of questions in the most expeditious way? And is there a way that we can answer one-on-one questions that are of personal nature? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, yeah, and much more. Look at how many. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have listened to the health consequences regarding Wi-Fi and 5G in urban suburban America. Now, here at my home, I've disconnected my Wi-Fi and I hardline to all my computers right now. It's pretty obvious that these so-called cell towers and these 5G towers are going up everywhere. And it's proven to reduce sperm counts and affecting minds, making people nauseous, where they can't sleep real well. Why is the opioid drug abuse higher anywhere else in the world than urban suburban America? Why are homelessness and gun deaths higher in blue, heavily taxed urban suburban states? We need to look at, what about our urban infrastructure? Are we going to have a tyrannical government or freedom? Is freedom?
Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Sheben's with us. We're talking about the possibility of providing some education to those who might be interested in pursuing what we do. And I'm talking about off-grid living, farming, raising your own food, paying less taxes, buying the farm equipment necessary, raising animals, all the things that we do, hunting, fishing, gathering, medicinal plants, herbs, and reducing the stress in your life from the current environment that so many people are involved in. You know, this racing to work, traffic, then get to work frazzled, and then the boss beats you up, and then you get home after being in traffic for way too long. And then what do? And it's just this treadmill of life that so many people are trapped into. And Rich jumped off the corporate ladder many, many years ago. Mrs. Finelli and I did as well. And we decided that we were going to do what's important to us rather than take orders from others. And that's what we've done. And you may want to do the same thing. And Rich and I are talking about a way of teaching you how to do what we've done so you can avoid making lots of mistakes. So many mistakes that others have made, have failed and given up, because it is daunting. There's no question about it. You just don't jump off the corporate ladder without planning and become successful. I know people who have more money than skills, and they just make serial mistakes. One mistake after the next. Pretty soon they're going to run out of money. That's what Rich and I are talking about right now, helping you avoid making those mistakes and how to become successful. Because we know where some of these pitfalls are. Absolutely we know. And we can help you avoid them if you're interested. But we don't know if there's any interest. Rich?
Well, Vince, it's pretty obvious that it's an aristocracy-serfdom relationship and not so much a left-right paradigm, as I mentioned all too often over the air. Look at the S&P, Standard & Poor's companies expected to buy back $800 billion of their own stock in buybacks, dividends, stock options for the executives, the CEOs and CFOs, and, of course, mergers and acquisitions, which basically means less workers, more consolidation, more robotics taking jobs. So as options become fewer and fewer for the average Joe, which is the bottom 93%, what are you going to do? Are you going to stand by and wait to be a someday Isle? I mentioned that term in my book, and I talked about it briefly, and I think that when I get calls from people from around the world, that's their biggest fear, is losing out on time leverage, losing out on their adventure years to do things and have a certain lifestyle where they can control their own destiny and be a little more healthier, but just have more fun as well. Now, look at all the urban, suburban infrastructure that's crumbling in America. Who's going to pay for that? Where's the money coming from? Are we going to have a tyrannical government, or are we going to lose our freedom of speech? Are we going to have gun confiscation? Do you want to be in urban, suburban America under that circumstance? How about currency and value and appreciation of commerce, folks? Are we going to have an SDR, special drawing rights, monitored by the IMF? Is gold going to shine? Is it going to be cryptocurrencies? What about the petrodollar? I'm sure all of you by now know that China now has a petro yuan, which is going to take put a lot of competition against our dollar. Are we going to be able to print like we've printed over the years? Probably not, because we're losing so much confidence in the U.S. dollar or fiat currencies in general. So where do you want to be when all this happens, when the collapse happens, because it's pretty obvious. Well, I mean, look at the S&P 500, folks. If you took $800 billion, you could build multiple walls along our southern border with that $800 billion. We could take so many people out of poverty. But yet, what does the elite do? They feather their own nest. Instead of putting money into R&D, into employees, into new people, into research and development, they're putting $800 billion into stock buybacks, dividends for the very wealthy. As I've mentioned many times on the show, 1% of the people own 83% of the stocks, 10% of the people own 96% of the stocks. And the stock options, as it goes up, all that money goes into feathering the nest of executives when they cash in their stock options. And guess what they do after all this? They sell corporate debt, more in the form of bonds. And they say, It could be triple Z rated, but they say it's triple A rated, and then they bundle it up, a.k.a. derivatives, in other stuff, and sell all these promises and all this debt that'll never be paid back to mostly pension funds and the little people, which is us. So I got a phone call 2 days ago from a couple from Pennsylvania. I'm not going to mention anything specific about them. But towards the end of the conversation, they really love this lifestyle. They read my book. A lot of people contact me because they read my book or heard me over the air or heard me in a talk or something. And they contact me and they say, I want to live this lifestyle. I want to have a plan B. I want to have other options. I want to learn new skill sets. I don't want to teach my kids how to push buttons, manage paper, and be politically correct. So what I suggest often to a lot of people who say, I don't have the economic means or the capital resources to buy land. So I said, well, then don't go to college. If 90% of the college degrees are worthless and you're paying tons of debt back and losing time leverage on establishing equity, is it really a smart move? Why don't you learn certain skill sets, like putting together solar arrays or building or clearing land or putting up foundations, things that are going to have tangible common sense and logic in its basic nature. Now, instead of going to college, how about you parents and grandparents, instead of spending money on that, and those of you who are going to lose all your pensions, why don't you buy rural land for your kids? Have your kids come out here and manage the land, and when you retire, you have a place to live. And in the meantime, the place is being parked out, structures are being put up like cabins and barns and garages and carports and solar arrays and gardens and fencing and animals, and all of a sudden you have a working farm or a hobby farm, however you want to label it, and you're teaching kids and grandkids skill sets. You have quality of life. You're controlling your own destiny. You're living healthier. Now, if you want to work urban, suburban America, and say work out of the home on the Internet like a lot of people do, that's an option. But what I'm saying is combine resources and think with foresight so the older generations have a place to live, to be taken care of in a debt-free setting while you're teaching your friends or family how to live. And it could also be a business model where in 5 years you get all these people together, and that's one of the things that Vince and I were talking about, and we get them together based on their skill sets. They cross-train. They live for 5 or 10 years living a great lifestyle, and then they sell their property for a profit, and profits are distributed on what is negotiated at the end game at the very beginning of getting the people together. And it's based on labor, it's based on skill sets, it's based on who puts in the most capital resources, a.k.a. money, and it's all negotiated, so everything is on paper, and there's no whining. Now, folks, everybody can see that the stock market, the bond market, everything is fixed. Everything is rigged. Even 20% of the Russell 3000 companies are called zombie companies because they can't even pay interest on their payments. So they're over-leveraged and under-liquid. And if the Fed does raise interest rates, which I hope they don't, because, as I always say, interest rates are a function of economic growth, wages, and inflation, and all of those are descending. So, but if they do, everything collapses. Stocks, bonds, housing, especially real estate in the form of commercial and retail, emerging markets. We can't even afford the interest in our debt now. How are we going to afford it if it keeps going up? Depending on what you read, we have to get $3 to $6 of debt for one percentage or $1 to be growth. I mean, that's a lose-lose situation. And well, people say, well, in a 30-year period during 1952 and 82, we had an economic surplus. We had higher interest rates. Well, the growth rate was also about 8%. And now we have robotics, automation, artificial intelligence taking tens of millions of jobs. So we have a situation where we have the largest economic deficit ever, trade and budget. We have $21 trillion of debt. $21 trillion, as I mentioned earlier in the show, has been stolen. They don't know where it is. Trade wars, there's a lot of talk about that. Basically, that's keeping your currency cheaper than the competition. But that's going to all come apart here pretty soon also. And I mentioned also in the beginning of the show, I want to talk a little bit about inflation and deflation. Now, when it comes to what we're running into is a hybrid stagflationary situation for the bottom 93%. It's the worst of inflation and the worst of deflation because wages aren't going up for us. Debt is going up for us. Savings is going down. Certain things are getting quite expensive because of subsidies, money printing, special interests, PACs, lobbyists, etc. So when you look at the things that are going up, like food and water and health care, college, insurance, taxes, lumber, housing, rent, transportation, stocks, it's all because of all this artificial manipulation in manufacturing. So when you look at overall debt, okay, this is the situation we're in, especially for the bottom 93%. When consumers, now remember, I try to remember to say this every time I talk about, inflation, deflation, or stagflation. 70% of GDP or growth is consumption-driven in America. And I will touch on that, Vince, if it's okay, on the other side.
Sure. Yeah, Rich Scheben and I'll be right back. Rich Scheben's website, offgridmontana.com, offgridmontana.com. We'll be right back. Rich, today's young people are extremely bored. I can't understand how a person can be bored. Because in my world, I'm having trouble figuring out which first thing is first. We have so many things on our plate that need to be done, must be done. We have to prioritize and figure out what we're going to attack first and solve first. And today's young people are bored. They're trapped by their cell phones. They're trapped by their texts and tweets and so forth. This is an opportunity for their parents and their grandparents to rescue them and get them out of this trap, this technology trap, where they don't know how to do things and they're bored most of the time. Think about that, class. Rich?
Yeah, well, thanks, Vince. Well, I tell my girlfriend all the time, I wish I didn't need to sleep because life is so exciting. There's so much things to do, and I'm pushing 60, so it's not like I have my major adventure years ahead of me. I just feel for these young people who, when they get to their 50s, they're going to feel like they've really missed out on life because of the technocracy and the imbalance in life between technology and nature. So that being said, let me finish where I was going and throw a little economics in here because I never get to, Vince, we've talked about this a million times, we never get past 10% of what we want to talk about on a 2-hour show. It's just impossible. So that being said, I want to talk about this hybrid stagflationary situation. I want to talk about, are we in inflation or deflation? When consumers buy things, especially when they buy it with cash and they don't leave a debt trail, basically it could lead to a demand trend in inflation in the short term. But that's not the case, especially for the bottom 93%. So when the powers that be talk about the economy, they're basically talking about the powers that be picking up the slack because, like you look at QE or quantitative easing, 95% of that money goes to the top 1% to 7%. I'm going to repeat that. For quantitative easing or any type of money printing, 95% of that money goes to the top 1% to 7%. So basically, corporate welfare, aristocracy welfare, is 10 million-fold what the bottom 93% gets in any other type of entitlements. So don't forget that, folks. And that's why we are not sanctioned, because we do not carry the narrative for the aristocracy. We are trying to give ideas and solutions to the little people. So I want to say, when people buy things on time, in other words, when you're paying interest, which increases your debt load, and that's at all levels, household, corporate, government, it leads to a trend in debt deflation because savings are going down, debt's going up. So people can't buy other goods and services because the middle class is broke. And when I say middle class, I talk about, obviously, the bottom 93% because the middle class and poor has melted together. Now, every U.S. recession in the past 60 years has been preceded by a negative spread. And I've talked about the spread on the show many times, a.k.a. basically inverted yield curve. And it certainly looks like we are heading towards that direction. And even though the powers that be won't admit we're in a recession, we are, because they always come back half a year after and say, oh, we were in a recession there, because all the books are cooked and they control the numbers, and of course they control the narrative and the memes, themes, and talking points. Now, I read an article, and some of you might have read about this, regarding home equity loans. Basically, they're calling it houses on ATMs because the people are broke. So for people who own homes, they have to go into their bank or lender and take out home equity loans. It's the same thing. It's analogous to a margin call in the stock market. People who are buying stocks and bonds are buying it on margin, which means they're taking equity out of their portfolio and buying other stuff, other products. So when margin calls occur, or when this recession hits full gear, which we have a 50% chance of being in a full-fledged depression with the numbers that are out there, everybody's going to lose everything. We have been set up to fail from 2008 with taxpayer-funded bailouts from the too big to fail and too big to jail. And this is why we can't live into the sanctioned narrative. Vince?
Going into the break. We'll be right back. But you're talking about stagflation, and the bottom 93% are broke. And here's some anecdotal evidence of that. You know, McDonald's workers are complaining that they don't earn $15 an hour, enough to sustain life, a living wage. They don't make enough to pay their bills. I don't remember McDonald's ever being a company that a person would consider making a career with. It just wasn't. It was typically a job that you'd get after high school, part-time, to learn how to be an employee and to learn the fast food business and why you don't want to work there. But it seems to me that people are so desperate for jobs, they're thinking that McDonald's is a place where they can settle within and just stay there. It doesn't make sense to me. That's how desperate people are. So that's just anecdotal evidence that what you're saying is correct about stagflation. And here's another thing. I was thinking about what you were saying with getting out of the city. So here are my thoughts very quickly. If a person lives in an urban setting, that person is 100% dependent on other people for virtually everything. What am I talking about? Water treatment, sewage treatment, garbage disposal, food, electricity, heating, roofing, painting. Everything that goes on around you is provided by somebody else. If you live in the city, you're trapped. Absolutely trapped. Why would you want to do that? Why would you want to be trapped? I think if you consider the possibility of getting out of the city, that's a great way to go. But why don't people leave where they live? Because they have family. The family's there. So most people would say, boy, I wish I could. I would if I could. But, I've got relatives here, got brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, nephews, so I can't leave. Got my job. Is that really true? I don't think so. You can leave if you want. Who's done it? Rich has. I have. And there are a few others. So yeah, you can if you want. But you might need some coaching. You might need to do a lot of research to figure out where is the best place to go. Rich found Montana was the best place for him. Mrs. Finelli and I and our family found that Missouri was the best place for us. There are other places. And maybe we should build a little village of like-minded people. People who can help each other. People who know plumbing, heating, air conditioning, solar, auto mechanics, gardening, food preparation, food preservation, efficiency, how to deal with the oppressive government, security, protection, self-defense, fencing, animals, raising animals, butchering animals. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Rich?
Absolutely. And living with alternative energy is not just from the skill set perspective. I look at it more importantly from the perspective of living below your means. You're forced to, like, for example, when I make energy now from first week of February to first week in November, I have unlimited energy, so I don't really pay attention. But during the winter months, if I don't have the energy, I don't use it. It's kind of an analogous to money in the bank. If I don't have money in the bank, I don't spend it, which too many people in America are losing perspective on that, as I mentioned earlier. But when you look at, I want to address some of the things you just said. Looking at McDonald's, I used to, I gave financial counseling to people even in my 20s, and I always used to use as working at McDonald's as a semi-retired situation where if you get out of debt, I always say you can work at McDonald's to pay your bills, and that's the importance of getting out of debt that I've always mentioned to people. And if you look at car loans, school loans, credit card loans, the subprime mortgage that we're in with vehicles and in just heading back into with housing, it's a very scary situation for the bottom 93%. And you talked about independence and things like that. I'll tell you right now, we always need people. We'll always, unless you're really a true mountain man living in Alaska or Canada somewhere really remote, which very few people do, you always need people, okay? We always, I spend a lot of time helping people over the phone and giving consultation and counseling to some of these ideas and solutions that we're talking about right now. And you also mentioned, people use the excuse, well, I have family here, I have brothers, I have sisters. Now, my brother followed me when I came out to Montana. I came out 31 years ago. He came out about 5 years later, and my parents came out after that, and we lost my dad in 06. But, they've had a great life living here. My brother loves Montana because he's also a hunter and a fisher, and he loves living where the human population to natural resource ratio is not so compromised. But think about it this way, folks. Let's say you have a brother or a sister here. Let's say you come here, and the crapper hits the fan with the tyrannical government, with a loss of our freedom of speech and gun rights. In other words, our Bill of Rights and Constitution. God forbid that happens. But if the people don't wake up and don't stand up and don't speak up and don't read up and stand for principle, it could happen. I hope it doesn't, but it could happen. Where do you want to be? Do you want to be in the FEMA camp of urban, suburban America, or do you want to be in rural America where you can control maybe a little more of your own destiny? And, of course, always needing people, because if you're around like-minded people, you're going to trade skill sets. You're going to try to help people out. When I hunt, I give away 50% of my meat to people who appreciate it. Now, and I give away vegetables that I harvest and stuff like that. And when we were talking about how we hardly have any free time, it's not because we're working our butts off and everything is a chore. It's because we love the lifestyle. Like, for example, the last commercial, I just started some seeds, some eggplant and peppers, and I just watered them and put in a piece of wood in my wood stove. So it's basically what you're doing is you're investing in a lifestyle, you're investing in a plan B, you're investing in options, and you're investing in a place where the family that you might be using as an excuse to not move away from, that you're actually preparing a safe place for them, whether it be a bug-out place, whether it be anything. It could be an EMP. It could be an economic collapse. It could be so many things that could compromise our way of living. So think about it this way. How many people have a plan B who are listening to this program? Well, the people listening to this program probably have a plan B, C, and D, but how many people in America don't? And this is why, for the people who are going to college, which to me is social indoctrination and absolutely just creating debt and dumbing people down, I think you need to look at a lifestyle like this. For people who have retirees in their family or friends, and they might have some extra capital resources, I think it's time to sit down at the negotiating table and talk to your young people about homesteading and pioneering a piece of land so they can, and you negotiate where the older people can live on it until death, and they help out with their capital resources. You get the property out of debt, you build the structures, you build the fencing, you build the garden, you build the solar array, whatever your lifestyle is. Live where you recreate. for those of you who live in urban, suburban America who are on a treadmill running to nowhere, and you don't see your savings going up, but your debt is, I think it's time to start sitting around the kitchen table and talking about a plan B. And this is where Vince and I may be able to help you thinking about a plan B. I've had people show up at my talks who were just curious about this lifestyle. I've had people here from Europe who have heard about me. People just want to think outside the box because they realize we're being distracted, dumbed down, and divided by groups, and people are getting concerned. So having a plan B and thinking outside the box is not a bad idea, Vince.
Okay. I've got some specific thoughts on what you just said. So the average new vehicle loan, the average, this is not the most expensive, most exotic. This is like right in the middle. The average new vehicle loan has just hit a record high of $31,100. The average loan for a used automobile is $19,600. Now, for the price of for the amount of money for the average new car loan, $31,100, a person could, if he shopped or she shopped a person could buy the amount of land that you could plant 40 urban homes on. You could literally plant 40 urban homes on the amount of land you could buy if you shop carefully for the amount of the average new vehicle loan of $31,100. Does it seem like this is nonsense? No, because if you look at how much land an urban home takes, maybe a quarter of an acre. So you could get about 10 acres in my neck of the woods for in the 30s. Can you imagine that? And what about taxes? Well, if there's nothing on that land, it's just, we'll call it recreational land, the taxes would be less than $100 a year. Imagine that. Imagine having no government supervision, no departments of inspection, detection, and rejection, no building permits. You just do it. Imagine that. That's what we're talking about. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And yes, we have. Now you can spend a little more money and get land that's tillable, and get better land, but literally for $30,000 you can buy some land, like 10 acres, which is pretty darn nice. And they're not making any more of it. We'll be right back. Now, I was looking at how much monthly payments for the average new automobile, how much they are. Currently, new monthly payments have hit $515 a month for the loan payment on the average new vehicle purchase. $515 a month. Now, to me, wow, I'm looking at $31,100 for the average new vehicle price. New loan amount. I didn't spend even 10% of that on the latest vehicle I bought, which was a Mercedes diesel. I spent less than 10% of the average vehicle loan amount for a new vehicle. Well, if you spent $515 as the new monthly payment for a new vehicle, heck, you could probably get 40 acres for that $515 a month. Now, of course, the term would be longer, be more like 30 years or 25 years. But, wow, what about the next vehicle that you buy? If you buy new vehicles when the payments stop for that vehicle, you're going to get another one, right? So the payments are going to be $515 and keep increasing as the price of vehicles keeps increasing. So instead of doing that, you can get an older vehicle like I bought and keep buying and get some acreage. What do you think, Rich?
Well, I think America has to stop listening to the sanctioned propaganda, especially from the mainstream media. In addition to that, if you're afraid of being a someday isle and you have a dream about living in the country, I think you got to ask yourself, is there a better time to move? Because who knows what's going to be of value, especially in the realm of currency or commerce, with the corruption and manipulation and deception that's occurred from the powers that be. And when I say sanctioned propaganda, the little boost that we got from economic activity over the past quarter had a lot to do with the hurricanes, the floods, the mudslides, the wildfires, because people lost stuff and they had to go out and buy stuff, mostly on time. And that's part of that debt deflation example I talked about just a few moments ago. So you have to ask yourself about what's going to be tangible, what's going to be worth something. Is food and water going to be worth something? Of course it will be. Is privacy and having a little land around you going to be worth something? Of course it will. Why is all the so-called smart money buying acreage all over America? Why are so many of the super wealthy, the billionaires, moving to New Zealand and the Cook Islands and other places around the country? Folks, we've been had. Okay? The little people have been used. Since 2008, this has been written in the bylaws of what's going to happen. Trump inherited sabotage. I'm telling you right now. So all these taxpayer-funded bailouts for the too big to fails and too big jails have been manufactured. Why are the S&P sticking $800 billion into buying back stocks, dividends, and stock options for the super wealthy, and mergers and acquisitions, which decreases worker productivity? It decreases workers, but increases productivity in the form of robotics and automation. Options are being limited more and more every day, people. And we have to start thinking outside the box. But there's nobody out there who really sticks up for the little people. And
I've got a question for you.
About.
Rich, I've got a question for you. Yeah, I'm looking at the ratings of who's on the air right now. All these people are way ahead of us. Laura Ingraham, Glenn Beck, Brian Kilmeade, Mike Gallagher, Mark Levin, Brian Sussman, Jesse Lee Peterson, Dennis Prager. Do any of those guys talk about how to move out of the city? Do any of these guys talk about how to get by on less? Do any of these guys, when you're all done listening to them, I'm asking the question because I don't know, do any of these guys talk about frugal living below your means? Why are they so popular? Why are they so popular? I don't know.
Sanctioned messaging.
Okay. Hey, Rich Shealy, thanks for being with us.
Always a pleasure, man.